You're listening to The Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Haristadoulou.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to The Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Haristadoulou, and it is that time again to make some game predictions going into week number 4 of the NFL season. We're sitting on a record of 24-24. The first 3 weeks have not been kind to me, but we're looking to get back on track. I talked a lot last week about the power structure in the NFL seeming to change, and I feel like week 3 solidified that even further. So with a new outlook on some teams, I'm hoping to get back on the rails of picking and getting some predictions right. So we'll dive into Thursday Night Football. I invite you all to comment down below. Let me hear your thoughts and opinions on this weekend's games. Make some picks along with me if you'd like to. But we'll start off again with that Thursday night matchup. We are looking at the Dallas Cowboys heading into New York to take on the Giants. And I've got to say, this is no sure thing for Dallas coming into this matchup here. Yes, they have won 6 straight games against the Giants, and all of those games by at least 7 points or more. But the way New York looks right now, it has been some time, I would argue, that we've seen them this vulnerable this early in the season. And there are some ways for New York to potentially target and maybe pull off an upset win here in this matchup. The first thing you look at here, while the offense hasn't necessarily been great, Dallas has really been struggling defensively against the run. They're allowing 185 yards rushing per game right now, which is dead last in the league, the most out of anyone. In New York's rushing offense, they're a little bit below average. They're about 19th in the league right now, just over 100 yards per game being averaged right now. But Devin Singletary had a pretty strong game last week against Cleveland, 165 yards, 2 touchdowns, 5 yards per attempt. Solid game to say the least for Singletary. If Cleveland wants to dial back into that because they've been having issues throwing the football so far this season, wouldn't be a bad idea against a team that is A, struggling against the run, but is B, just not super deep on the defensive line right now, and it's starting to show even in the linebacking room as well. Next thing I'm looking at, one thing that I think will be really interesting to see how it goes down, wide receiver Malik Neighbors. How does Dallas defend him? The guy has been on an absolute tear. He leads the league right now in targets with 37. He's got 23 catches for 271 yards and 3 touchdowns through these first 3 weeks of the season, averaging a touchdown per game. This is a guy who is exploding on the scene right now and is honestly making Daniel Jones look a little bit better than he has the last few years of his career. So I'll be interested in seeing how the secondary, Trayvon Diggs and company, how they handle locking down Malik Neighbors, because I do think he is the X factor on this offense for the Giants right now. And then Dallas specifically, just looking at them offensively, they have got to balance themselves out. Now, for regardless of what you think of Dak Prescott, he can throw the football. He is definitely a good quarterback. You could argue he's a very good quarterback. Whether you think he's great or elite or any of that, that's not the conversation I'm trying to have. I think he is a very good quarterback at the very least, and I definitely think that is worth mentioning. Now, despite all of that, you don't win football games with a one-dimensional offense. And for the Dallas Cowboys right now, they literally cannot run the football. They have not been very good at it so far. They rank 30th in the league in rushing yards, with Zeke and Rico Dowdle carrying the majority of the load so far this season. There's the possibility that maybe we start seeing Dalvin Cook get into the rotation as well, so I'll be curious if he adds any juice to that. But the O-line up front has been struggling to get some push at the point of attack during runs as well. If they can get the ball moving on the ground, I think Dallas could at least get in a better position to be able to compete with some of the better teams right now that they're struggling against. So New York, they're allowing about 131 rushing yards per game. Getting something going on the ground should be key for them. And I really want to emphasize that, because going into this game here, listen, I'm not saying that the New York Giants defense is some massive threat, but their pass rush has been pretty good so far this season, and they could pose an issue for Dallas. They have 14 sacks this season, and Dallas has allowed 12 on their own. There's probably a bit of a mismatch going on there, especially with two guys like Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau on the edges going after Dak Prescott in this one. There is definitely some things to be concerned about, but I will say that I'm comfortable at least taking Dallas to this point here. When I look at the Giants, yes, they got a big win over the Cleveland Browns, but I don't know how big of a win it is over the Cleveland Browns in the current state that they're in. but I do think I can trust in Dallas to get the job done, so I'm going to go with the Cowboys. I have them winning 28-20. If this game winds up being even closer than that and the Giants make the Cowboys really sweat this one out, I would not be surprised, but if there was ever like a get-right opportunity for Dallas, this is the game for it, and it's on a short week here. So give me Dallas 28-20, but I would not be surprised if this game gets a lot closer and a lot scarier for the Cowboys, with the Giants potentially pulling an upset. The next matchup we're going to look at here is going to be into Sunday's slate of games. Here we have the New Orleans Saints taking on the Atlanta Falcons, this game being in Atlanta. Right now, the Falcons are 0-2 at home, with the Saints coming in with a victory in their lone away game so far this season, and I have to ask, did the Atlanta Falcons let themselves fall to 0-3 in front of their home crowd? Has not been perfect in Atlanta, but New Orleans, after a really strong couple of weeks, fell into a pretty tough spot last week against Philadelphia. First thing I'm looking at is going to be the Saints' offensive line, with the loss of center Eric McCoy, who looks like he's going to be out for anywhere from like a month and a half to 2 months altogether because of the injury he sustained last week against the Eagles. Quite the crash back to earth for this offensive line. And I don't want to say that Eric McCoy is going to be the death of this offensive line or anything dramatic like that, but I definitely think it is something worth keeping an eye on here because, again, you do have, the loss of Eric McCoy, but you have also two very young offensive tackles on the left and right side in Talise Fuaga and Trevor Penning over on the right. So you do have a lot to consider with what this offensive line could look like without a really good center in Eric McCoy. And you see what happened last week. The team finished with just 89 rushing yards altogether after averaging 190 basically through weeks 1 and 2. You also allowed a 40% pressure rate on the 25 dropbacks he took last week. So there's definitely some concerns there at the very least. Atlanta, though, on the flip side of things, they haven't been really great generating pressure. So this is a chance to capitalize on that. Generating pressure on just 20% of dropbacks this season so far, which is dead last in the NFL, which is essentially 1 in 5 dropbacks where they're actually pressuring the quarterback. New Orleans was extremely efficient passing the ball through weeks 1 and 2, but they obviously took a step back last week. As I mentioned, 40% pressure rate. Things got a little dicey for Derek Carr in the pocket. So if you can make New Orleans one-dimensional, yes, challenging them to run the football on you maybe is not necessarily the best thing because of how good they looked through the first couple of weeks. But if you can make the offense one-dimensional, you know what you need to do. You know you need to stack the box, and you could find the Saints rather in a really tough position offensively. The Saints defense has definitely got their work cut out for them this week, but I will say New Orleans being a very stout defense, I think that they are up for the task here, but I think it's worth mentioning. With Bijan Robinson in the backfield, racking up 196 yards rushing, Atlanta loves to run that ball to the outside. Obviously, if you can think back to last week against the Kansas City Chiefs, that 4th down fail to the outside, they have no problem stretching those runs outside the tackles. New Orleans definitely has to keep things tight. They have to set those edges as the offense tries to take the ball to the outside, but definitely keep an eye on Bijan Robinson because he has been a force to be reckoned with running the football. And then last but certainly not least, something else that I think is worth mentioning here, Kirk Cousins. How does he take it to this New Orleans Saints defense? As I mentioned, this has been a very good unit. They are 8th against the pass right now with the 5th most passing attempts faced. Typically, when that number in the passing attempts category starts to get up really high, you start to push that number of yards down simply because of the fact that they're seeing so many looks in terms of passing. But this defense has been up to the task. They've been really good, really disruptive. They've been putting teams in really tough spots, and he's going to face a productive pass rush that has 11 sacks on the season, which is tied for 5th with a handful of teams right now. Kirk Cousins has got to be on his A game. As for who I think is going to win, though, in this matchup here, this is going to be tight, and I think this is a really hard one to pick. And one of the things that keeps coming back to me that I said at the beginning of this is just Atlanta. Do I really believe they're going to fall to 0-3 at home? These are the games you're supposed to be winning. You're supposed to have it easier in your home crowd. But these Saints-Falcon games can be really wonky. And yes, the Saints O-line looked really tough last week, but I do think having a week of preparation to get themselves ready with a new center lining up in that offense, I'm leaning Saints here, But again, if the Falcons pull out the win, wouldn't be too surprised. But I think I like the New Orleans Saints. I think they get the offense back on track. And for the offense in Atlanta, it just has not really felt like they've reached that point where they are in a rhythm and they're really able to get after some of these defenses. And with the Saints having one of the better units in the NFL, in my opinion, I could see that giving them some problems here. So I'm taking New Orleans. I have them winning 26-21. We'll see how this one shakes out. If I'm wrong, I wouldn't be too shocked, but I do like the Saints here. Now, moving into the NFC side of things, or we're still staying in the NFC side, I guess I should say, we have the Los Angeles Rams heading into Chicago to take on the Bears. This is a really tough one to go and pick on because you have a Rams team that is dealing with a litany of injuries, but are coming off of one of the most improbable wins over the San Francisco 49ers last week. And then you have a Bears team, really stout defense, one that could probably give the Rams a ton of trouble. However, do I really trust in the offense and what we've seen through 3 weeks to be able to battle with the Rams if Stafford and company gets things going? Because I think Stafford, being one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL, despite everything that's going on around him, he's still a gamer. He can still deal when he needs to, and we saw that from him last week. It's hard to bet against him sometimes, even when the situation doesn't necessarily look great, and he's dragged some really ugly teams into some pretty good positions through his career. You look at Chicago and just the way they're able to bring pressure. They make quarterbacks uncomfortable, but they haven't been really good at getting to the quarterback completely. They only have 7 sacks this season, but with the way that offensive line in LA is looking like right now, they're battered, they're bruised, they are dealing with a lot of starters being down. I could see maybe Chicago having a little bit more success this week, so definitely worth keeping an eye on. A good matchup that I think that's going to happen in this game here to keep an eye on is going to be the Rams wide receivers versus Chicago's secondary. I would definitely give the edge to Chicago's secondary with the current state of LA's wide receiver room, but you got DeMarcus Robinson, Tutu Atwell, and Tyler Johnson taking on Jalen Johnson, Kyler Gordon, Tyreek Stevenson, the cornerbacks there. Chiefs defense ranking 9th in pass breakups, 4th in interceptions, 7th in passing yards allowed, and the Rams overall just passing efficiency per next-gen stats is sitting at a rank of 20, where Chicago's defense against the pass efficiency is sitting at number 3. So there is definitely a bit of a mismatch there with just how good this secondary is, especially that cornerback room in Chicago going up against the Rams wide receiver room that is missing both Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua at this moment. Rams probably need to focus on leaning on the run in this matchup, leaning into Kyron Williams and Blake Corum to open up the offense a bit. Definitely something they need to. Chicago's run defense not nearly as stout as it looked last season, especially in the back half of the year. Things have been getting through a little bit more. They rank 17th in rushing yards, allowing a little bit over 120 yards a game at this moment here. And the Rams themselves haven't necessarily been great at running the football. However, they did find success last week against San Francisco with nearly 100 yards and a couple of touchdowns from Kyron Williams. So balancing out the offense a little bit, I definitely think is in the best interest of the Rams to try to, take as little chances as necessary against a really good secondary that's been, again, giving teams a lot of problems with just how aggressive they are and their willingness to get after the football. Chicago themselves offensively, it really is just about giving Caleb Williams the time he needs to throw the football. But in my opinion, I also think they need to focus things a little bit more in like the short, quick passing game. Try to get the ball out of his hand as quickly as possible. It feels like Chicago is trying to do some of these like longer developing plays, and whether it's Williams just having a tough time going through his reads and maybe not finding the open guy quick enough, or it is just the play design and how long some of these routes are going. Like, let's just shorten things up, get the ball out quick. If you notice the way things ended for them in that game against Indianapolis last week, a lot of the passes were 10 yards or less for Caleb Williams, and he really started getting comfortable and obviously pushing over 300 yards. He managed a couple, 2-3 touchdowns by the time that game was all said and done. I think keeping the passes short and quick will be in their best interest. The Colts have some injuries in their secondary with Juju Brents on the IR. Kenny Moore is listed as questionable right now. So if they do shorten things up, they definitely have themselves a chance. I feel like they kind of found a recipe for success in Chicago towards the tail end of that game against Indianapolis. Now it's just a matter of replicating that going forward. But as for who I think is going to win the game, I am leaning the Rams on this one here. I trust Matthew Stafford to be able to get the job done. The Bears are not perfect right now. That defense is awesome over there in Chicago, but the offense is just one that I've been picking the last few weeks, and I keep getting burned on it after their first victory in week number 1. So I think I'm going to shy away from the Bears right now. I want to see the offense consistently get things going, and I want to see Caleb Williams just a little bit more comfortable in the pocket. So if the Bears can work on that, maybe I'll feel more comfortable picking them in the coming weeks. But going into this one here, especially the way the Rams pulled off that win last week against the 49ers, I feel like Rams are trending in a good direction at this moment. So I'll take LA 19-17, tighter game, lower scoring affair, because I do think that Bears defense holds the Rams back a bit, but the Rams squeak out the win when it's all said and done. Now we'll take a look at the Minnesota Vikings and the Green Bay Packers, a battle in the NFC North, where wildly enough, the last time I checked, the Packers favored in this game despite not having Jordan Love. And now it sounds like there is a real shot for Jordan Love to play this game. Ian Rappaport was reporting yesterday that there is a very real possibility of that. Whether I think it's too soon or not, I think it's too soon, but if they're comfortable with it and Jordan Love is comfortable with it, they're going to have him play. So we'll see what happens there. But definitely something that's interesting, considering we don't necessarily know what's happening with Love. As for the actual matchup itself, you look at the way Sam Darnold has been playing right now, leading the league in touchdown passes, despite ranking just 22 in total pass attempts here. He has been dealing, and he hasn't even really had to be throwing the football that much here because the running game has been really strong with Aaron Jones, who joined over this offseason. He's had a touchdown pass go to Justin Jefferson in each of every single game so far this season, and Green Bay's passing defense has been a little bit leaky, so definitely something to keep an eye on here. They've allowed 5 passing touchdowns, 222 passing yards a game, which is the 11th most in the league. There's definitely some issues to be worked out in Green Bay right now that they've been trying to work on, and hopefully it gets a little bit better. I would say it's not nearly as bad as it was last year, but they are still prone to leaky defensive looks when it comes to dropping back and allowing wide receivers to work their way through their coverages. Green Bay, though, offensively for them, they've been dominating on the ground without Jordan Love, and I don't really see why they're not going to try to go back to what has been working for the last couple of weeks here. Josh Jacobs has been tearing through contact. He has 230 yards after that first initial contact, and the team's averaging 204 yards per game on the ground, which leads the league at 5.5 yards per attempt at that. Minnesota will be a tough test, though. Obviously, I think Green Bay leans into what they think has been working for them, and this is one of those like ego check type of things where you're a run offense or an offense that has been running extremely successfully, and you're going up against what is ranked as the second best run defense in the NFL, allowing only 71 yards per game. This is a matter of like who's who and who's actually better than the other. I could definitely see Green Bay challenging this because they want to prove a point in this game here, so this will be a fun matchup to see who winds up winning there. Green Bay does need to keep in mind, though, Minnesota's pass rush has been wildly effective this year. While they might rank only 8th in pressure, and I say only 8th, but they're still in the top 10, they sit atop of the league with 16 sacks. They have been very efficient with the pressures that they are getting here and getting to the quarterback. Green Bay, though, their O-line, and part of this might have to do with the fact that they haven't been throwing the football as much, but it is worth mentioning. Only 5 sacks allowed, 4th lowest number of pressures allowed. In the minimal snaps that they've taken that have been drop back passes, for the most part, they've been doing a really good job over there. So we have ourselves an interesting matchup on that front as well. Is the Minnesota's D-line, or is it going to be Green Bay's O-line that wins out that battle whenever we're seeing if it's, Malik Willis and or Jordan Love dropping back to throw that football? For the matchup, who I think is going to win here, I would feel like there could be a lot more to be said if Jordan Love was guaranteed to be playing. But right now, with the way Minnesota is clicking, I think I have to lean with the Vikings on this one here. This feels like the Vikings have really turned a corner. I am still so shaky on Sam Darnold just because of having watched him throughout the entirety of his career. I understand it's a completely different situation now, totally different offense. It's the best offensive mind he's probably been with, not named Kyle Shanahan, and he's actually getting a real opportunity in this team. And again, much better skill set of guys. Jordan Addison, you have Justin Jefferson. TJ Hawkinson's not even playing yet. Aaron Jones has been great out of the backfield. Offensive line has been really good as well. I get that. But I have seen when things go wrong what Sam Darnold looks like, and I'm just waiting for that to happen. And to be fair, we got a quick glimpse of the old Sam Darnold with a pass that got called incomplete, but he basically did the Will Levis. The only difference was he was facing in a different direction when this happened, but as he's falling to the ground, letting the football loose, Houston thought they got a fumble. It got called into an incompletion, but that was one of those things where it's like, just hold the ball and take it to the ground. And he just tossed it out as he was heading to the ground. He's lucky it was ruled a fumble and not an incomplete pass. It was the right call, don't get me wrong, but that was I saw that moment happen as it happened live, and I thought to myself, oh my God, this is what I'm worried about. Hopefully that was just a blip in a little mistake. It doesn't happen again, but I just have some slight concerns about Sam Darnold. That's all. He's been doing great. Love seeing what he's doing. If this is the real career resurgence for him, fantastic. I'm taking the Vikings in this one here, despite those concerns, but I do have that in the back of my mind. But I'm going to take the Vikings 27-23. I think we're going to have a really fun contest in this one. The next matchup we're looking at is going to be an AFC clash between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Indianapolis Colts. And while it is not Anthony Richardson's rookie season, it sure does feel like it the way we've been seeing him play. Obviously only getting in through 4 games, I believe, last season. And now he's going up against Mike Tomlin, who has a really good track record of giving young quarterbacks one hell of a time in their matchups against his defenses. Pittsburgh as a defense has been slaughtering offenses to this point here, and there is a piece of me that is genuinely worried about what they might do to Indianapolis. With the numbers you are looking at, tied for second versus the run, 5th versus the pass. They're tied for 4th overall in yards per play allowed, 6th in takeaways, and they are allowing a league low 8.5 points per game. They have been decimating opposing offenses through 3 weeks of the season. Now, if you want to talk about the offenses they face, totally other conversation that we can have, but they have done an excellent job against the opponents they've gone up against, and they can't make their schedule, they just play it. Indianapolis offensively, they have 6 turnovers. They're only averaging about 19 points per game. They're ranked 26th on third down efficiency. There are a lot of things that point to them having some issues against this Pittsburgh Steelers defense. And again, I'm just really concerned. Leaning into Jonathan Taylor is probably going to be their best bet. I know that this is a very good team against the run, but Jonathan Taylor is probably their most talented player on offense at this moment in time. So leaning into him, he has 261 yards and 3 touchdowns rushing this season. Trying to take those runs away from TJ Watt and heading towards the side where Alex Highsmith is typically, because he's going to be out for this game here. You got to avoid TJ Watt. You have to. Indianapolis defensively, about average at best to maybe slightly above if they're playing at their very best, but they're dealing with a handful of injuries right now, especially to the secondary and defensive line. They're allowing the 12th most yards per game against the pass, which I'm concerned about this because we've been seeing some steady growth from Justin Fields over the last few weeks, and it really feels like he's putting it together over there in Pittsburgh. And we're at the point now where there's no reason for Russell Wilson to take over unless Justin Fields does a complete 180 and just starts playing horribly. He's done a really good job taking care of the football. He's not lighting up the scoreboard, but he's having his best career season by far. When you look at the numbers, he has 518 yards passing, a 73.3% completion rate, and a 95.3 passer rating, which are both career bests for him at this moment in time. And coincidentally enough, all of this is happening while he's facing literally the least pressure in his career, since his rookie season. So there's a reason why this is happening, and it's because of the situation that he's in and the situation he got out of that we're currently witnessing over in Chicago with Caleb Williams. I'm not saying the two are the exact same thing, but you look at the O-line and just how uncomfortable Caleb Williams has looked through 3 weeks right now. Justin Fields looks far more comfortable in the Pittsburgh Steelers offense right now. As for who I think is going to win here, I definitely think it's going to be a lower scoring affair, not even crossing the 40-point threshold. But I do think the Steelers find some success moving the ball against this Colts team that is just in a really tough spot right now. It was one of the uglier wins that I have seen so far this season against the Chicago Bears last week. I do think that they give that Colts offense a lot of problems defensively, and I have the Pittsburgh Steelers winning 23-16. Good win, not necessarily a runaway, lower scoring game as is typical for the Pittsburgh Steelers, but I think they do find some success in Indianapolis offensively this week. Now we'll take a look at the Denver Broncos heading into New York to take on the Jets. And the first thing that came to my mind as soon as I sat down to look at this game, Bo Nix versus that pass rush. from the New York Jets here. The Giants ranking number 2 in pressure this season with 14 sacks on the year. Bo Nix, according to PFF, is completing just 44.7% of his passes while he's under pressure. He has not been good when the pressure is on. When he doesn't have pressure, though, he actually looks pretty solid. Excuse me. As for the Jets' offensive line on the flip side of things, I definitely think they're going to have their hands full with the Broncos' pass rush. The New York Jets have allowed the 6th lowest pressure rate this season, so they've been doing a really good job of giving Aaron Rodgers as much time as he needs, but Denver has pressured quarterbacks at a 45% rate, which is third best in the league, and on top of that have managed to rack up 11 sacks in the year, which is tied for 6th with a handful of other teams right now. This defense in Denver has been very problematic for opposing teams. We saw what they did to the Buccaneers last week, and this is one of those things where we saw some mobility from Aaron Rodgers against the Patriots last week, and he's probably going to do that, not even because he wants to, but because it's going to be necessary with just how effective Denver has been coming after the quarterback. Another matchup that I really think is interesting with this one is going to be Garrett Wilson versus Pat Surtain II. Surtain has been basically shadowing every single team's best wide receiver through 3 weeks of play, and you have him now going up against Garrett Wilson, who's had a really good season to this point, caught his first touchdown pass from Aaron Rodgers last week, and Pat Surtain's coming off a game in which he lined up against Mike Evans for a vast majority of the game, and he allowed only 1 reception to Evans for a measly 8 yards. This is going to be one of those matchups where, especially with Aaron Rodgers being Garrett Wilson's quarterback over the next couple of years, if we get to see this, keep an eye on this, because this is 2 of the best at what they do going head-to-head here. Pat Surtain's one of those guys, really big fan of. I've been huge on him since he's come into the league, and he has turned into that shadowing corner, the guy that's going to follow and shade the best wide receiver of every single team. And he's been doing an excellent job at that. So Garrett Wilson certainly has his work cut out for him, but it's not like Garrett Wilson is some slouch. Pat Surtain's hands will be full as well. For this game, though, who I think is going to win, I am leaning New York Jets on this. Based off just quarterback alone, I feel like you could probably come away from just looking at this game feeling more comfortable with the Jets, but I do think the defense is a little bit further along as well, and I have some concerns about how this O-line in Denver is going to hold up against the Jets, but we kind of got a really good glimpse of what the Jets could potentially be last week against an inferior opponent like the New England Patriots, and while I'm not really sure, if you could sit here and definitively say that Denver or New England is better than the other. I think they both have their flaws. I would say Denver's maybe a little bit further along than New England is at this very point here, but it's not a massive gap. And I think the Giants defensively should have somewhat similar success, maybe not exactly the same, but similar success against this Broncos offense. So give me the Jets, 24-16. Now we'll take a look at what is a rematch from last year's playoff card. We have an NFC wildcard rematch between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This one should be interesting. Philadelphia's defense, after what was a really ugly first couple of weeks where they were averaging about 399 yards per game allowed, finally got it together and took down an offense that was just slaughtering teams from the first couple of weeks of the season to the last game of last season. The way this offense had looked in New Orleans, it looked like they had turned the page and they had really figured out what they were doing offensively, but they ground New Orleans to a halt, allowing just 218 yards and 12 points on the game. This defense made me feel a lot better about where they stand going up against such a high-powered opponent. Now, defensively for Tampa Bay, as for what they need to focus on in this game here, it's all about Saquon Barkley. The Eagles have not been perfect on offense. They have some issues that we'll get into in a second here, but when you look at like the heart and soul of the Eagles offense right now, it really feels like it's Saquon Barkley, especially with the prospect that A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith could miss this game here as they're still listed as questionable. That is definitely something to keep an eye on here. Saquon Barkley is going to be a huge part of what this offense does this week. 5.5 yards per touch this season. He has 404 total yards and 5 total touchdowns, half of his total touchdowns since in 2023. So Barkley's having a career resurgence in one of the better situations I think he has ever been in, if not the best situation that he has ever been in his career offensively. This is one of those things where you've got to figure out where Barkley is at all times and try to bottle him up where you can. Tampa Bay offensively, their O-line definitely needs to make sure they're protecting Baker Mayfield. Like I said, last week we saw the defensive front in Philadelphia really come to life against the Saints' offensive line, especially after Eric McCoy went down. You have 4 guys that are currently ranked in, and this is per Next Gen Stats, 4 guys that are ranked in the bottom 3 at their respective positions in pressures allowed on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offensive line. Luke Godecki is expected to return at the right tackle spot, so hopefully that does help for the offensive line, but things have not been pretty in terms of protection of Baker Mayfield. He has been under a lot of pressure the last couple of weeks. Jalen Hurts, on the other side of things, Eagles offense, definitely needs to take care of the football better. He is sitting right now on 4 interceptions to 3 touchdowns passing. Not great by any means, but he also has 3 fumbles total. Not lost specifically, but he has fumbled the football 3 times to this point in the season now. That is 7 total potential opportunities for teams to come away with a turnover. Obviously, the picks, they came away with 4, but he's dropped the ball 3 different times as well. He has got to do better in taking care of this football. This is a very weird year for Hurts, as from what we've seen over the last couple of seasons. Last year was obviously not perfect as well, but it feels like he's making a ton of mistakes and just some really errant throws. He's got to do a better job with his decision-making, where he's putting the football through the air and just making sure he's protecting it when he's moving around in the pocket. And then last but not least, keep an eye on Dallas Goedert. Like I mentioned, with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith potentially missing this matchup here, you look at the way Dallas Goedert exploded last week, 10 catches, 170 yards versus New Orleans. There's a good opportunity. He sees a lot of looks again, especially if there's no Devontae Smith too included. This is a good opportunity for a guy to go over the middle, be effective at what he does, taking teams out, kind of gut punching them right in the middle of the field here. Keep an eye on Dallas Goedert. Tampa Bay has definitely got to find an answer for him. Guys like Devontae David, KJ Britt, they've got to step up over the middle. For who I think is going to win here, this is a tough one because, again, Tampa Bay coming off of a really ugly loss to the Broncos last week, one that I don't think anyone really saw coming with the current state of both of those teams going into the matchup. Now you are in a spot where you're probably questioning the legitimacy of Tampa Bay and where they really are, and also Philadelphia gutting out a really grindy, ugly win, but getting the job done. You're probably feeling good about where the Philadelphia Eagles are, and that's kind of how I stand. I think they kind of put it together last week, so I'm leaning Philadelphia on this one. I have them winning 21-14, not a super high-scoring affair, because I do think defenses maybe win out in this matchup a bit, but I do like the Eagles just a little bit more here. Not super confident on this pick here, but I do like Philadelphia. Now we'll take a look at the Cincinnati Bengals and the Carolina Panthers. Andy Dalton could do one of the funnier things that we have seen in the NFL in some time, and that is not only put down his former team, but send them to 0-4 and essentially kill their playoff chances. From the research I did, it seems that only the 1992 San Diego Chargers remain as the only team to go 0-4 and still reach the playoffs, finishing the season 11-5 and winning the AFC West, which is wild to think about. It would be one of the more poetic things to see Andy Dalton himself put down his former team at the age of, 36 now, as he's stepping in to take over for Bryce Young, who got benched going into last weekend's game. Big issue for Cincinnati could be their struggles to generate pressure. We saw Andy Dalton complete 20 of his 27 passes in under 2.5 seconds for 211 yards and a touchdown last week. He was ripping the ball out quick, and he was doing a great job with where he was putting that football. The quick passing game could be big for Carolina, and if Cincinnati, who's not really generating a ton of pressure, can't make him uncomfortable, Andy Dalton's a guy that he's seen a lot. He's been around for a long time now. He's not going to feel uncomfortable in a pocket if it's not moving around on him and guys aren't getting through the O-line quickly enough. He will slice and dice you. He's very experienced, and we saw what he could do last week. It appears as though Joe Burrow maybe had got his mojo back last week, so there is a shot that we might see a little bit of a higher scoring affair in this contest here. He finished the game 324 yards and 3 touchdowns, the best game we've seen from Joe Burrow in quite some time. Carolina ranking right in the middle of the league in terms of passing yards allowed. Something tells me that he and Andy Dalton might be going blow for blow in this one, and again, in 2024, to see Joe Burrow battling the guy who used to take the Bengals to the playoffs yearly, and him still being in the league, taking over for a number 1 overall pick just a couple of years ago, that is a storyline that you can't even make up, and it's one of those things that just only happens in the NFL by chance. And here we are, Andy Dalton, Joe Burrow, in what I think could wind up being a potential shootout. And one thing I want to see from both of the teams in this game here, and I definitely think is possible, is going to be just some more from the running backs on the ground here. Chuba Hubbard's currently averaging 5.9 yards per attempt the last couple of weeks off of 31 carries, and Zach Moss is averaging nearly 5 yards himself in weeks 1 and 3. Last week week 2 having a bit of a down game, but that was 5 yards per attempt on just 21 carries. I want to see these offenses lean into their running game a little bit more. They both have good running backs that are clearly showing that they can get the job done here. And Zach Moss is someone who, when they brought him into Cincinnati, I thought that he was going to be toting the rock a lot more than he has to this point. And I think he's an effective running back. He has definitely shown that through his career. So get the guy the football. Like, put the ball in his hands, balance out your offense a little bit. Yes, you have Joe Burrow, you have T. Higgins, you have Jamar Chase, but he's averaging nearly 5 yards per clip minus week number 2. So, like, let's scheme some things up for him. He only has 21 carries so far this season. Tote the rock a little bit more. For who I think is going to win this one, though, this is a really hard one because it's hard to look at Carolina and really dictate what they are now that they've gone through a quarterback change and then flip the switch and just gut-punched the Raiders last week. I don't really know what to make of Carolina now. I still stand by the fact that I think they're one of the most dysfunctional franchises in the league, and I'm not going to change that stance anytime soon unless this thing does a complete 180. But I look at Cincinnati, and they are like a broken mess. And yes, they're losing games by just one score, less than that essentially, but they're still 0-3, and nobody had them pegged at 1-3. Everyone thought Joe Burrow coming back, you have Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, you replenished your running back room. Like, this was supposed to be a team that's probably at worst sitting at 2-1 with like a loss to the Chiefs. But now here we are at 0-3, and they're about to face their former quarterback who just torched their opponent last week, and he hasn't started a game since, like, I don't know, the middle of last season. So this is a hard one to pick. I am, however, going to lean with Cincinnati. I think they get the job done. They finally get the monkey off their back and get that win. If they go to 0-4, there is a lot of conversation that needs to be had surrounding Cincinnati, and we will certainly have it. But I think they avoid the 0-4 near-death sentence in terms of playoff contention, and they get the win here. But I don't think the Panthers go down without a fight, and it's going to be something higher scoring potentially because we've seen some weakness from this Bengals offense. And I think last weekend's game last Monday's game, I guess you should say, was definitely one of those games where they got a little bit exposed against Jaden Daniels and that Commanders offense. The Cincinnati Bengals defense has not been perfect either. Give me the Bengals 30-26. Panthers go down fighting. Now we'll focus on an AFC South clash. We have the Jaguars heading into Houston to take on the Texans here, and Doug Peterson comes into this game in one of the hottest seats in the NFL, in my opinion. His insistence on having Press Taylor as his offensive coordinator calling the plays is something that is of serious conversation surrounding the Jaguars right now. I love going through like Reddit and Twitter and just kind of seeing what everyone's saying about things. Like, I'm not one to post, but I am one to definitely do a lot of reading and see what's going on and just like kind of like where the heads are at of teams and just how they're feeling. And it seems like Peterson is in some trouble. And when you look at the fact that Shad Khan, coming into this season, he's proclaiming that this is the best Jaguars team that they've ever assembled, from the coaching staff to the player personnel to the front office, and now they're sitting at 0-3, staring down the barrel, and the Texans, who are coming off of a really ugly loss to the Minnesota Vikings, who probably want to take out that frustration on a down-and-out Jaguars team. If they go 0-4, and on top of that, it's not pretty, because it definitely wasn't pretty on Monday Night Football, Doug Peterson and company, they're going to be in some trouble. We'll leave it at that. Both of these O-lines struggling against opposing pass rushers. Pass protection has not been great. Both teams have allowed 12 sacks to this point. However, Houston's pass rush might wind up being the key factor in this one here. They are sitting on 12 sacks and a league high in pressure rate right now, where Jacksonville, they have the third worst pressure rate in the league, and they only have 5 sacks racked up this year. And this was not supposed to be the case for Jacksonville, because you have Josh Hines-Allen, who's really coming into his own, or he was at the end of, or going through last season and coming into this season now. And you also had Trayvon Walker, who was finally really looking like that first round or first pick overall kind of potential that he had coming into the league. But now Jacksonville sits near the bottom of the barrel when it comes to getting after the quarterback quarterback. They're not getting much help from the interior either. Things are not pretty on that front in Jacksonville at the moment. Both of the rushing attacks have been average, so I think whoever could maybe step up and find some more success running the football might be getting a slight edge in this contest here. Both defenses are allowing about 4 yards per attempt versus the run. Jacksonville has allowed about 20 yards per game more, but they also have seen more rushing attempts, so that number might be a little bit skewed. So both these run defenses are about neck and neck, roughly. As far as quarterback play is concerned, when you compare like Trevor Lawrence and CJ Stroud, this is one of those other things that I think could wind up being a deciding factor in this one here. Lawrence has been struggling. He's completing about 53% of his passes. He's only got 560 yards, which isn't a terrible number, but not where you want him to be at this point. You want him to be dicing up defenses. He only has 2 touchdowns to an interception. He has not looked comfortable in the pocket, whereas CJ Stroud, yes, had a tough week last week, but he's sitting on 4 touchdowns with a couple of picks, 709 yards. He's completing nearly 70% of his passes at 68. There's a lot, in my opinion, especially with this being in Houston, that points this game in the Texans' direction, which is why I'm going to lead Houston in this one. I am really concerned, and I feel like it's hard to say that, you know, Jacksonville coming off of a really ugly loss isn't really going to put in, isn't going to put in enough to maybe avoid something like that happening again. I think they do, but I still don't think it's pretty. I don't think it's going to be as ugly of a loss for them. And AFC South games, I feel like they're one of those divisions that just like the game results never really make sense. Like Jacksonville might just come in and whoop Houston for whatever reason. Like things like that happen in the AFC South all the time. But where Houston is right now, coming off of their ugly loss, like one of these teams is going to come in to smack the opponent because they're angry about what happened last week. And if I had to pick one, I think I'm going to lean Houston on that one. And I have them winning 28-17, so I'll take the Texans here. This next matchup, this is a hard one because you have a 2-1 Commanders team going into Arizona to take on a 1-2 Cardinals team. Both quarterbacks, mobile, threats throwing the football, as we've seen Jaden Daniels really come into his own the last few weeks. This is a toss-up. There is no clear-cut winner, in my opinion, here. Yes, you're in Arizona, so maybe a slight edge being in front of their home crowd here, but the Commanders have been wildly competitive, and their offense looks like it's ready to explode. Jaden Daniels versus Kyler Murray. This is points. If you're somebody who likes to bet, I'm not a gambler by any means, but if you like the over in things, this feels like a game that could be the over when you look at the defenses and how they match up. This is also the Cliff Kingsbury revenge game, so you can definitely expect that the Commanders are coming in looking to make a point for their guy in Cliff Kingsbury. I'm really excited for this game, and I can't believe I'm saying that about a Commanders-Cardinals game. Washington defensively has not been great. They've been letting teams move a lot this year. They're allowing the 4th most yards per game and points per game this season. You couple that with the fact that Marvin Harrison Jr. has been rounding into form the last couple of weeks after a tough week 1. You got to try your best to shut him down, but you also have to make sure you can contain Kyler Murray, who has been surgical throwing the football. 5 touchdowns to only 1 pick. He's got 635 yards, and never mind what he can do with his legs on the ground as well. Arizona has also been a little bit better defensively to this point as far as what Washington has been doing. They have, though, struggled with a mobile Josh Allen. We saw them in week 1 dealing with him, and it was not pretty, especially in the second half. Josh Allen really got away from them. 9 carries, only 39 yards, but it was where he was picking to run that football is what was killing the Arizona Cardinals offense. He had a couple of touchdowns on the ground, coupled with the 230 yards and a couple of touchdowns through the air. Jaden Daniels is even more of a mobile threat than Josh Allen is, in my opinion, and it seems like he's really getting comfortable throwing the football now, especially downfield. We saw that one big play to Terry McLaurin. He's currently getting the ball out at the 2nd fastest rate amongst any quarterback in the NFL right now, which is unbelievable for a rookie because his decision-making is just so quick and so snappy, and he completed a rookie record 91.3% of his passes last week against Cincinnati. Arizona's got to keep tabs on Terry McLaurin and Brian Robinson. Robinson's averaging 4.6 yards per attempt on the ground. McLaurin coming off of a big 100-yard, 1 touchdown against the Cincinnati Bengals last week. This game, in my opinion, is all about the offenses. While you can look at the defenses and say, Arizona has been a little bit better, Washington feels like they're kind of like a tidal wave that is just getting bigger and bigger right now, and we kind of saw it do its final crash onto the Cincinnati Bengals last week, and now I'm curious to see what that second wave is going to look like. And they're rolling right now offensively. I think we're getting a lot of points in this game here. Both defenses probably going to struggle a bit with how mobile and how effective both these quarterbacks have been throwing the football, and because of what their mobility allows them to do in extending plays. I'll take the Commanders 29-27. I like the underdogs in this one here, but it's going to be a point fest. And honestly, 29-27, not as high of a score as I think this game could go. I'm just trying to be somewhat realistic about it. But if this game winds up being like 2 30-point scores between both these teams, I would not be surprised with how this game is shaping up. Now we'll take a look at what I would consider the biggest trap game that we have seen so far this season, if it other than like maybe Cincinnati going up against like New England a couple of weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, whenever that was. The Patriots going into San Francisco to take on the 49ers, who are licking their wounds after what was a disastrous end against the Los Angeles Rams. Here's the deal. With the way that New England has looked, there's kind of no reason that they should be winning this football game. Pass protection has not been good. The time to pressure, 2.44 seconds, is the 4th fastest in the league. Jacoby Brissett running for his life, even though he's somewhat of a mobile guy. That's not typically how he's winning football games. He is someone that likes to throw the ball, but he is running for his life, and he's not really able to throw the ball. They have the 2nd highest pressure rate. He's been sacked 11 times, or 10 times, I believe, one of those sacks going to Drake May. He's averaging a league-low 3.5 yards per pass attempt right now, or it might be a little bit higher than that. It's a team number, not his number specifically, but the team is averaging 3.5 yards per pass at this current point right now. San Francisco's pass rush hasn't been crazy by any means. They've been about average, I would say. They have 8 sacks, 13th in pressure rate, and they're not blitzing very often. They're actually one of the lowest blitz rates in the league, ranked 31st. I think it's like 14.1%. There is the potential, though, that with just how bad the offensive line has looked in New England, that San Francisco looks better than what their numbers have been to this point. New England has been able to run the ball, but they struggled last week, and in large part, a lot of the running success has come from Ramondre Stevenson and his ability to break off runs despite hitting initial contact. He's one of the best yards after contact guy in the league. He has 226 yards, which is 3rd most in the NFL. San Francisco, though, ranking 8th against the run. They're tied for 4th lowest in the missed tackles as well, so they're a good tackling team. They're really good at defending the run, stuffing the run. This will be one of those things where New England, if they're going to upset this game, they're probably ground and pounding their way to a victory if they were to pull off an upset. But San Francisco, for what it's worth, has been pretty good at stopping the run. We also have a Christian Gonzalez versus Brandon Ayuk matchup most likely incoming here. Brandon Ayuk to this point has not really done nearly enough considering the amount of money he's getting paid right now. We can get into that at some point, but not for right now. But Brandon Ayuk not nearly putting up the numbers that he should be considering what he's getting paid. And Christian Gonzalez has been money so far for the Patriots at this point in his career, and I'm really excited to see him continue to evolve his game. He has the potential to turn into one of the best corners in the league with the way he's been playing, and he's probably already working his way into that conversation. And then lastly, I'm looking at Jordan Mason and just how he stacks up against New England here. He's been having a really good season to this point, and honestly, this is a big reason why San Francisco has still been so competitive, even with like the shock loss last week. 324 yards on the ground, so he's averaging over 100 yards per game, 4.8 yards per attempt. He's got 3 touchdowns on the ground as well. Yes, he is not Christian McCaffrey, especially as a receiver, but he has done a really good job of keeping this running game alive. You do have to keep in mind that there are some potential injuries with the 49ers in this game as well, which is why, again, trap game situation, like, yeah, the better team, but they're hurting right now. Brock Purdy's been dealing with a back issue. He's been a full participant in practice, but definitely something to keep an eye on. Deebo Samuel, Trent Williams, and George Kittle are all on that injury report as well for practices, so just keeping an eye on that is something to think about as well. But again, trap game as trap games could be, in my opinion, when you look at this here. Hopefully San Francisco isn't trying to look ahead after last week's loss. Settle on the opponent you are facing this week, and honestly, it should be a dominating effort for them. And with that, I have the 49ers winning. I like them something along the lines of like 28-13, a good dominating display, maybe even 35-13. They should come in this game here as a significantly more talented team, both offensively and defensively, and it looks like you're getting Talanoa Hufanga back as well, it sounds. You should be coming into this game and decimating New England. You saw how bad they looked against the Jets. We all saw what the 49ers did to the Jets in week number 1. San Francisco should be putting the hurt on New England here. This next game that I got to pick, I'm going to be honest with you, I literally have no idea how to make the pick on this game. I spent a lot of time trying to dictate who I thought was going to win this game and for what reasons, but I mean, both these teams have a ton of issues coming into this game, and both situations are very much like in a flux right now. You look at the quarterback situation for both sides. Deshaun Watson has not looked good at all. He's been very uncomfortable with the pressure, and at some points doesn't even seem like he can tell that the pressure is coming, which is even worse. Like, it feels like he has lost his feel for the pocket altogether. Then you look at Las Vegas, Antonio Pierce alluding to a possible quarterback change. So are we going to see Gardner Minshew? Are we going to see Aiden O'Connell? And there's just so much uncertainty surrounding the most important position for both of these teams right now. You couple that with the fact that Las Vegas has not really been able to run the football. They're a league worst 51 yards per rushing. Cleveland's about average or so, maybe slightly above when it comes to defending the run. They're 13th in rushing yards allowed. But Cleveland and their injury issues make them a extremely unattractive pick with just the amount of guys that they have on their injury report. They have 13 players listed as at least limited or did not participate in practice as of yesterday. So, who is going to be on the field for Cleveland right now? Both of these teams are in wildly uncomfortable situations at this point, sitting at 1-2 on both sides. Browns obviously coming off of an ugly loss to the Giants. And then you look at Las Vegas. I went on this whole thing about how I'd have no real will to be picking the Carolina Panthers in any games going forward because I had no reason to believe in them. And then they come in and they punch the Raiders in the mouth. So it's like, who do you pick in this game? Who is your actual favorite? Like, how do you even dictate that with the way these two teams have looked? I don't really know. The game being in Las Vegas, though, does give me some hope for the Raiders. They're not the ones doing the traveling, so more work on the Cleveland Browns part coming into this game here. So I'll lean Las Vegas. I have them winning 20-17, but if I had to pick like a least confident pick, solely because of just how bad both of these team situations are at this current moment here, I'll go with the Raiders, I guess, but this is one of the least certain picks that I have coming into this week. Next, we're looking at the AFC West with the Kansas City Chiefs hosting the Los Angeles Chargers. And this is a game that's a little bit unfortunate here because if everyone was healthy coming into this matchup, this is one of the most exciting games of the week, in my opinion. You have the Chiefs 3-0 going into LA's house, and you're trying to take down the Chargers, who have Justin Herbert. They have this awesome rookie offensive lineman on the right side in Joe Alt. But instead, you're getting a team that is potentially going to be missing Joe Alt, Rashawn Slater, Justin Herbert. Derwin James was suspended for a game. Joey Bosa's on the injury report. Like, there's, again, so many injury issues going on, or just guys not going to be available for this game for LA, that I don't really know how the Chargers are supposed to compete in this game here with the Kansas City Chiefs. I'm expecting a really run-heavy offense from LA. It sounds like Justin Herbert's very adamant in playing, and while that's all fine and dandy, you could tell he was not comfortable last week, and ultimately he wound up getting yanked out of the game because he re-aggravated his high ankle sprain, and I'm worried he winds up getting hit and getting taken out again. And then, Kansas City does rank at least in the top half of the league. They're like top third, I guess you should say, against the run. And do I trust Easton Stick or Taylor Heineke or even Justin Herbert to throw that much behind an offensive line that's missing their starting left and right tackles? I mean, Los Angeles has the benefit of being the home team with KC doing the traveling. And I expect them to be competitive in this game here, but it's going to take one hell of an effort for the Chargers to come out victorious here, especially if Justin Herbert's not playing. I anticipate he ends up playing, but I don't really think it's in the best interest of this team in the long term. And that's kind of unfortunate. I would love to see these two teams go at it full strength because I think it would have been a really exciting contest. But I have the Chiefs 27-17, and I just hope that coming out of this game, Justin Herbert is fine. That's kind of my biggest takeaway. Looking into Sunday Night Football now, though, an exciting clash. We have the Buffalo Bills taking on the Baltimore Ravens here. Baltimore, despite being 1-2, they are the first big test for Buffalo, in my opinion. Baltimore is better than their record. All of their games have been tight losses that they've lost. And Tight victory last week, near comeback victory for the Cowboys, but they got the job done. They put Dallas away. Stopping Baltimore on the ground is going to be key for Buffalo, plain and simple. Their offense goes through Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry, and it's very clear Lamar Jackson wants it that way, and I think they're going to make it that way. Buffalo has been about average defending the run. They rank middle of the pack in yards allowed, total runs stuffed, but they have allowed only one rushing touchdown to this point in the season. Baltimore's rushing attack, when you look at Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson, have combined to this point for 535 total yards and 5 touchdowns on the ground between the two. So Derrick Henry, Lamar Jackson, those are the guys you are trying to stop here. Lamar can obviously throw the football. He was 12 of 15. I believe he had a touchdown pass, nearly 200 yards passing or so, something along those lines last week. So their running game obviously opens up what they're doing through the air, but they are focused on ground and pounding teams into submission. And I do think it would be in the Buffalo Bills' best interest to try and do some of the same. I am going to continue to hammer the table about this. This Buffalo Bills offense is by far the best offense we've seen Buffalo put together, simply because of the fact of how balanced they are, and there's no force feeding the football to anyone. They are dishing out the ball to everybody, but James Cook has been a huge proponent of why this offense is the way it has been through 3 weeks of football. You're looking at James Cook and what he's done as a running back and as a receiver, 5.8 yards per touch, nearly 6 yards every time he's getting the football in his hands, whether it's on the ground, through the air, nearly 300 yards altogether, and he's got 4 total touchdowns. He is a big reason why this offense is the way it is, and that is successful, dominating, and they're pounding opposing defenses to this point. You got a tough task in Baltimore, but James Cook, do not sleep on him. He is a big reason why this thing is working the way it is. I don't want to take away from Dalton Kincaid and Khalil Shakir, who has looked phenomenal. Yeah, I don't think he's dropped a pass in like 27 targets or something like that. I remember reading that number somewhere. But James Cook, he is a big reason why this is working the way it is. As for Baltimore's end defensively, for them, it's all about containing what Josh Allen is doing. These following numbers are according to PFF. The numbers could be skewed, obviously, with the way they do their stuff, but these are per PFF numbers because I think they're worth mentioning. Josh Allen against pressure this season, 11 of 19, 145 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interception. Okay, so maybe try to send the blitz, make him even more uncomfortable. Maybe that works out for you. Probably not. According to PFF, against the blitz, Josh Allen, 19 of 25, 252 yards, and 5 touchdowns. It seems like bringing pressure and blitzing Josh Allen might not be the way to go. Unless you are really making sure that you are containing him with inside the pocket, he will get outside and he will dice your defense up. It sounds like maybe dropping some more guys into coverage, just sending a 4-man rush and trying to get some coverage sacks is more likely the best route to go. We'll see how they opt to attack Buffalo in Baltimore's defense, but I don't really know what the answer is to Josh Allen right now, because he has been unbelievable. Like, he is borderline on the conversation of playing as the best quarterback in the NFL right now, and if you want to say he is, like, I get it. I absolutely get it. He is killing it right now on the ground, through the air, against pressure, when the blitz is on him, when he's not being pressured. Like, he can do no wrong right now. He has completely erased the turnover issue that he's been dealing with the last season or so, and he has been a dominating force. Baltimore has their hands full in this one. As for who I think is going to win, something tells me we're going to see some fireworks in this. It's Sunday Night Football. This is one of the most exciting games that we've had so far this season on paper, because again, you have Baltimore, bad taste in their mouth with a couple of ugly losses the first couple of weeks, or even just heartbreaking losses more than anything else. But then on top of that, you've got Buffalo, who has been running through opponents right now. Everyone wants them to beat an actual good team, I guess you could say. Even though it's while you can discredit wins to a point, like, you're still 3-0 in the NFL, and they've dumpstered their last 2 opponents at the very least. And Arizona's game, that game was closer than the scoreboard would like to tell you, but a different conversation for another day. I like the Bills 29-27. I think we're going to be in for a treat Sunday night. Looking at Monday's doubleheader once again, hate that they do this, but here we are. Doubleheader for Monday night. We got the Tennessee Titans heading into Miami to take on the Dolphins. Could this be the week that Tennessee locks up their first win? I think so. You have no Tua. Will Levis, is obviously struggling. This is definitely a hard game to pick. It's in Miami, though, but it'll be later in the day. You don't have to worry about the sun and the extreme heat and all that. So that is nice for Tennessee, although they come from Tennessee, so it's not like it's necessarily the coldest place in the world during the summer there either. But you don't have to deal with the nasty humidity and heat that you get in Miami. That being said, for Tennessee, they've got to take care of the football, plain and simple. A league-leading 8 offensive turnovers to this point in the year. Miami isn't known for taking the football away. They only have 3 takeaways this season, but it's not even about what the defenses have been doing. Tennessee just feels like they're literally giving the football away weekly. And 8 offensive turnovers, you're averaging nearly 3 a game right now. Take care of the football, plain and simple, and you have a very good chance of winning this game here. Miami's defense has been solid. Not anything spectacular, not bad by any means. Solid is kind of where I like them. Points per game average is a little bit inflated due to that game against the Bills that they had where things got really out of hand. Did, I think, 3 interceptions from Tua, and did Skylar Thompson throw one as well? I thought I saw 4 interceptions. I felt like there was 4 interceptions, but maybe I'm remembering that wrong. You got a couple of picks off Geno Smith last week. The defense is ranked 5th on 3rd down. They are doing some things pretty well, other things not so much. But again, I would say that this defense is a solid defense at this point here, and their biggest test is really going to be just bottling up Tony Pollard and forcing Will Levis to win with his arm, which I think is a good route to go if you're a defense. Miami definitely needs to get creative running the football. Tennessee's ranked about 20th versus the run right now, allowing nearly 250 yards per game on the ground. Miami hasn't really had a ton of success running this season, which is kind of bizarre given that the running scheme that Mike McDaniel loves to put together is so creative and so versatile, and we've seen what they can do when they're, moving at full steam. But they've been dealing with injuries in the running back room, and with a lack of a passing threat, I think it's making defenses key in onto what Miami's trying to do on the ground, and it's causing some issues. But Miami has got to get creative running the football if they want to have any shot of winning this game. This is genuinely a toss-up for me, and I really don't know who comes out victorious here, but we're in a situation right now with the Dolphins that who is going to be the quarterback? Is it going to be Skylar Thompson? Is it going to be Tim Boyle? And am I counting on Skylar Thompson or Tim Boyle to get the job done? Like, this offense looked anemic against the Seattle Seahawks. Titans defense, I wouldn't say is a Seahawks defense to this point here, but they're still a solid unit. I think they might be able to give the Dolphins some problems. This is going to be one of those uglier games to watch, in my opinion. I'll take Tennessee. I have them winning 17-10, but not necessarily a game that I'm super confident in because both teams are dealing with their own tough situations right now. But I think with no real threat in the passing game right now for Miami, this puts them in a really tough spot. So I'll take the Titans, I guess. And then to wrap up the week, we also have on Monday Night Football, the Seattle Seahawks heading into Detroit to take on the Lions. The Seahawks have won the last 6 meetings versus Detroit, and the last 3 games totaled 80, 93, and 68 points altogether. Very high-scoring affairs. So the big question here is, can Detroit bury their demons and their struggles against the Seattle Seahawks team? Geno Smith, this is something, according to Next Gen Stats and NFL Pro's website, versus man coverage has been completing 73.5% of his passes. The reason this is worth mentioning is because Detroit has run man coverage on 46% of opposing quarterbacks' dropbacks this season, which is second most in the league. You look at the wide receivers that Seattle has in DK Metcalf, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Tyler Lockett. This could pose a bit of a problem here. When teams run man coverage as much as they do, it's because they believe in their guys in the secondary to match up really well. And I think that with the upgrades that Detroit has made this offseason coming into this year and what we've seen in terms of play, they believe in their guys. So this is really going to be our guys versus your guys. We think our guys are better than your guys type of contest here. So keep an eye on that matchup. I think those Seattle Seahawks wide receivers have their work cut out for them and vice versa in the secondary trying to deal with those 3. This is going to be a fun one. As far as Detroit goes, I'm very interested in seeing how this O-line fares against Seattle's defensive front. Detroit is averaging 163 rushing yards per game on the ground at a whopping 4.8 yards per attempt. 64% of those runs are heading to the outside, so going beyond the tackles when they take those runs. And Seattle has been solid versus the run. However, they were decimated by the Patriots a couple of weeks ago on the ground, allowing 185 yards on the ground. If I'm Dan Campbell, I've been watching tape on what New England was doing and what they were doing successfully against Seattle, because New England took them to the very end. That game got finished in overtime, and it was tight all the way to the finish line. I think that running the football could potentially be the answer in this game to not only just take the ball out of Geno Smith's hands, taking the ball out of potentially being in the hands of that skilled wide receiver trio that they have in Seattle, but controlling the clock, controlling the pace of the game. I would not be surprised if Detroit tries to get extremely physical offensively with Seattle and really test them defensively, especially with a rookie head coach in Mike Macdonald. And then with the defenses, this was an interesting stat that I found as I was looking at the game here. Both of these defenses are ranked in the top 5 at 3rd and 4th, with Detroit and Seattle respectively on third downs. Third down is going to be a key spot in this game. The defenses that are coming up big, shutting down the opposing offense, is potentially going to win this football game, especially with the potential of the points getting so high. It's going to come down to who makes that big stop on third down when it gets into crunch time in the fourth quarter, who finishes things off. So keep an eye on third down. I think whoever wins that battle there, both not only defensively, but also offensively as well, and who is able to crack that other team's defense, is going to be the reason that that team wins. For who I think is going to win, this is a game that, again, the demons are there. The history is there. Like, there is concern with how Detroit matches up against Seattle. For whatever it may be, Seattle has had Detroit's number the last 6 times they've matched up. And those last 3 games were all-out warfare in terms of offensive scoring. I believe the game in January of 2022, I think maybe a playoff game, or it was just late in the end of that season, I can't remember. The Seahawks put 52 points up, and Detroit only got 29. The other 2 games far closer. I believe the last meeting was an overtime matchup, if I'm not mistaken. So all of these games, high-scoring affairs, really fun to watch. Something tells me, though, it is about that time that Detroit gets that W. So I'm going to take the Lions on this one here. I think they snap the streak. They get the win on Monday Night Football. They take down the undefeated Seattle Seahawks, give them their first loss of the season, but in a shootout, very fun contest to end off week number 4. And we look into week number 5 at a very different look in terms of what the NFC playoff picture is looking like after the first quarter of the season is wrapped up. So give me the Lions, big win on Monday Night Football in Detroit in front of their home crowd. But those are my picks. If you made it to the end, as always, I greatly appreciate it. Thank you for taking your time. Comment down below. Let me hear your thoughts, your predictions. What do you think of my picks? Am I missing anything? Is there anything I should be looking at for these matchups here? But my picks are made. I want to hear yours too. I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.